At 11:30 p.m., while preparing for landing, the aircraft, which was the most technologically advanced of its time, suddenly experienced a burnt-out light bulb. The entire crew was focused on the burnt-out light bulb, unaware that the death knell was sounding. They entered a swamp area with completely dark spaces. From here, eerie stories also began to spread on flights on the round-trip journey to Miami. While the aircraft was cruising steadily at 39,000 feet, strange noises began to appear in the cockpit. They originated from the equipment bay, beneath the cockpit floor. The two pilots cautiously approached and opened the hatch. A figure appeared. It was Don Repo. He was staring at them as if he wanted to say something, then quickly vanished again. On another flight, this time in the passenger cabin, in seat number 3, a middle-aged man had boarded the plane very early. He looked extremely gaunt and pale, occasionally muttering something. Seeing this, a woman turned around to ask and talk, but he appeared extremely flustered and said nothing. The chief flight attendant was called, but the man had disappeared. What was chilling was that the seat was empty from the beginning. Upon reconfirmation, the female passenger was terrified to realize that she had just been talking to Bob Loft, a figure considered taboo in American aviation. The question here is, who are Bob Loft and Don Repo? Why did they appear on these flights? To find the answer, let's go back a few years to a fateful journey. Eastern Airlines Flight 401. December 29, 1972, at John F. Kennedy International Airport, New York. The Lockheed L-1011 Tristar was performing the final technical checks, preparing for the over 3-hour journey to Miami International Airport. Controlling the aircraft today was a crew of 13 members, including 10 flight attendants and 3 pilots. The captain was Robert Albin Bob Loft, 55 years old, a veteran pilot with 32 years of service with Eastern Airlines. He had accumulated 29,700 flight hours. However, only 280 hours were on L-1011 aircraft. The first officer was Albert John Burt Stockstill, 39 years old, who had 5,800 flight hours, 306 of which were on L-1011 aircraft. The flight engineer was Donald Lewis Don Repo, 51 years old, who had a total of 15,700 flight hours, 53 of which were on L-1011 aircraft. Additionally, occupying the cockpit jump seat was a company technical employee returning after an assignment in New York, Angelo Donadio, 47 years old, participating as a passenger. Christmas had just ended. So many people were looking for a warm place to relax. Thus, the flight was initially fully booked, but due to heavy snowfall causing road blockages, 65 people were unable to board. There were only a total of 163 passengers on board, significantly fewer than the expected number. After completing the procedures, at 9:20 p.m., the aircraft took off. It quickly climbed to cruise altitude, heading south towards Florida. Autopilot was also engaged. The flight was completely normal, and almost all passengers were excited. 2 hours after takeoff, the L-1011 began its approach to Miami. At this time, First Officer Stockstill was at the controls, while Captain Loft reviewed the approach checklist and landing checklist. The weather at that time was very favorable. The runway was gradually appearing in the distance. The flight was assigned to land on runway 09 using the ILS approach method. The crew began combining autopilot and manual control for the landing. It was also at this moment that a problem began to appear. The light bulb was burnt out. When only 5 kilometers from the airport, Captain Loft proceeded to lower the landing gear. Only 2 out of the 3 indicator lights illuminated. This indicator light was extremely important because it signals whether the landing gear has been deployed and locked securely in the correct position. The captain seemed momentarily confused. He raised the landing gear again and then lowered it. Continuous clattering sounds were heard, but the light still didn't illuminate. The crew could not take the risk. The captain reported the situation to air traffic control and stated that they would enter a holding pattern until the light came on or until they could verify the position of the nose gear. ATC issued instructions and requested them to maneuver the aircraft into an area west of the airport where it would not interfere with other approaching aircraft. Coincidentally, Eastern 401 was not the only aircraft approaching Miami that night experiencing landing gear issues. Another flight, National Airlines Flight 607, reported a similar problem but couldn't find a solution. The airport had to deploy all emergency response measures. During that time, air traffic controllers were extremely busy and did not have much time to pay attention to Eastern Flight 401. Analyzing the situation, there were two possibilities on the aircraft. Either the landing gear was faulty or the indicator light was faulty. Flight engineer Don Repo attempted to activate a test that could illuminate all lights in the cockpit, helping the pilots check if the light bulb was burned out. The result was that only the nose gear light did not illuminate. Both the captain and first officer tried removing and reinserting the bulb, suspecting it was loose, but it still did not light up. During this time, the aircraft had reached the target altitude as requested by ground control. The captain asked the first officer to engage the autopilot for the aircraft, maintaining the altitude of 2,000 feet. Once everything was set, confident in the advanced technology of the flight control system, all three once again turned their attention to discussing the light bulb. The city lights gradually disappeared, replaced by the dark voids of the swamp. The captain was gradually losing patience. As an experienced person, his gaze began to drift towards the hatch located on the cockpit floor. Beneath it was an electronic equipment bay. There, through a small window, pilots could visually check if the landing gear had been deployed correctly. There wasn't much time left. He instructed the flight engineer to go down below and check, a solution that could resolve all concerns. The pilots breathed a sigh of relief, but they failed to realize a terrible thing had just happened. While turning back to confer with the engineer, the captain had inadvertently applied just enough force to the control column to turn the flight into a disaster. When the captain leaned on the control column, the autopilot system did not completely disconnect, but switched from the altitude hold mode previously set by the first officer to control while steering CWS mode. The aircraft's pitch attitude would remain fixed until the control column was moved, leading to a gradual descent without any warning from indicator lights or sounds. Because it was nighttime and the aircraft was over the dark territory of the Everglades, the pilots were even less able to notice the abnormality occurring. Outside the cabin, most passengers were still asleep. ATC once again instructed the crew to maneuver the aircraft to a heading of 270 degrees west. The captain acknowledged, and the first officer began setting up the autopilot. Exactly at this moment, a warning chime sounded from the flight engineer's station, indicating that the aircraft had descended 250 feet below its initial altitude. But the engineer was still down in the equipment bay, and neither the captain nor the first officer paid attention to this sound. A few seconds later, the engineer managed to put his head through the hatch and reported that he couldn't see because it was too dark. The company technical employee, Angelo Donadio, went down to assist him. By then, at Miami International Airport, the National Airlines aircraft had landed safely. After a period of focus, the controller began to look back at his screen, where he suddenly realized that the altitude indication on the radar for Eastern 401 read only 900 feet. At that time, Miami Airport had become one of the first airports in the world to install an advanced secondary radar system, capable of displaying the aircraft's altitude, speed, and heading. However, its accuracy remained questionable. Sometimes there were significant altitude discrepancies between different radar sweeps. Just then, as if realizing something, he asked the captain again about the aircraft's altitude. The captain began to look at the instrument, where the altimeter needle was almost pointing to zero. He was panicked at that moment. The aircraft was too close to the ground. A radio altimeter warning sound blared. Captain Loft lunged forward to advance the throttles, but it was too late. At 11:42 p.m., Eastern Airlines Flight 401 crashed into the Florida Everglades swamp at a speed of 365 kilometers per hour and a bank angle of 28 degrees. The lights flickered and went out in the ink-black night, met by the sound of tearing metal from the violent impact. The fuselage shattered, and large sections of the L-1011 fell into the shallow water, ejecting debris and passengers. Fuel spilled throughout the cabin, followed by the scorching heat of flames. Finally, the wreckage came to rest among the mud and tall grass, leaving a trail of destruction stretching hundreds of meters, a horrifying scene in the middle of the night. The first people to realize the L-1011 aircraft's accident were Robert B. Marquis and his brother Ray Dickinson, who were out in the swamp catching frogs. They witnessed the entire explosion. Although the fire quickly extinguished, they were still able to boat to the accident site using flashlights. A horrifying scene unfolded before their eyes. Around them, people were screaming and crying, bodies were scattered among the aircraft debris, and the pungent smell of jet fuel filled the air. Despite the potential danger, the two frog hunters jumped into the water and began rescuing anyone they could. 5 minutes after the incident, a local police helicopter arrived at the scene. The captain was found near the cockpit. Initially, he had survived, but due to prolonged immersion and severe injuries, he succumbed shortly thereafter. First Officer Stockstill, found right next to him, also did not survive. Due to the challenging terrain, it took up to 64 minutes for the first survivors to be brought to safety. Initially, there were 79 survivors along with a dog. However, one passenger and flight engineer Don Repo later died due to severe injuries. Over the next 2 months, 2 more passengers also succumbed while battling symptoms of deadly necrotic infection caused by bacteria in the swamp water. Out of 176 people on board, only 75 survived and 101 perished. At that time, this was considered the most tragic aviation accident in the United States. Due to the seriousness of the incident, the National Transportation Safety Board opened a major investigation to determine the cause. This combined testimony from maintenance employee Angelo Donadio with the contents of the black boxes, including the L-1011's flight data recorder. The final conclusion was that the cause was pilot error, as they failed to recognize the aircraft's problem during the final critical 4 minutes. Additionally, some other objective factors were mentioned, such as the darkness of the swamp, resource allocation at ATC, and radar system inaccuracies. Thinking that the tragedy on December 29th was already enough for a terrible year-end day, what happened afterwards was even more haunting. The most widely shared urban legends in the aviation industry, the appearance of ghosts at the accident site. Many mysterious occurrences began to take place. Several witnesses, including salvage workers, aviation engineers, and supervisors, reportedly saw many spirits standing, sitting, and wandering around the area where they were working. Although most of the aircraft was destroyed, some wreckage from the tail section and galley could still be salvaged. Both Eastern and Lockheed agreed that these parts could be reused and installed on other L-1011 aircraft during manufacturing, including one specific aircraft, N318EA. And from this point on, a series of strange, ghostly situations appeared with increasing frequency. In 1973, an Eastern Airlines L-1011 Tristar was on a journey from New York to Miami. On that day's flight was the airline's vice president. As a VIP passenger, he was allowed to board the plane early and sit in first class. As soon as he was settled in his seat, a man in uniform approached and started a conversation with this passenger. In just a moment, the man in uniform walked towards the end of the aisle and then disappeared without a trace. The entire flight was checked, but they could not find any sign of the mysterious deceased captain. The ghostly stories spread everywhere and made passengers start to feel apprehensive. Eastern ordered all of its employees to stop spreading these untrue stories and rumors and threatened to fire them if the situation continued. However, the ghostly occurrences continued to happen repeatedly. Many paranormal investigators and ghost hunting groups requested to board the aircraft to explain the strange phenomena. However, the airline refused this. They proceeded to remove the parts from the salvaged 401 wreckage to dispel all suspicions. And coincidentally, since then, the ghosts never appeared again.